Shalom. I'm Messianic Pastor Michael Brown, and I want to welcome you to session 26 of this series, Messiah Yeshua's Life, a Messianic Jewish Perspective based on a harmony of the Gospels. This week, we'll continue looking at paragraph 10 and Dr. Fruchtenbaum's book, which covers Luke 2, verses 1 through 7, and he is entitled The Birth of the King. So again, please have your Bibles open to Luke chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. Let me just share the screen. We looked at these verses last time, but just in case, well, it's been maybe a couple of weeks or something or more since you've probably seen it. So let me just read the first 6 verses again. It says, "Now in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census be taken of all the inhabited earth. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria." And I mentioned in the previous session, Caesar Augustus, he was also called Octavian, that the census I went through in terms of what the census might have been, when it might have been. We can't say 100%, but I mentioned some options like could have been 8 BC. It could have also been in 2 BC when he was asking everybody to pledge allegiance to him in the empire, call him the father of the country, and that there was apparently accounting at that time. So probably it was one either of those, or it may have been an unidentified census that we don't know about yet. And then it says this was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. I mentioned we know he was governor in AD 6, but we believe he was in some kind of a leadership capacity back earlier than that. And some people, like I said, they view it maybe as early as 7 BC. Others, I say others, there's some believe that maybe it was 4 to 1 BC. But anyway, you can go back and watch the previous session to get the details on that. All right, verse 3. "And everyone was on his way to register for the census, each to his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem in Hebrew, Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, in order to register along with Miriam, who is engaged or betrothed to him, and was with child. For they were there, while they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth." Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that. Now, I want to continue this, and I mentioned last time that there's 2 main things I wanted us to look at in this session. And here's the first one. You know, this talking about Yeshua's birth, that raises a logical question. What was the year of Messiah Yeshua's birth? All right, well, let me just say right up front, we can't say dogmatically, but I can say certainly, I think, some ranges of time that we can be pretty certain it was in one of these 2 ranges that I'm going to mention. Let me just say there's 2 main approaches in trying to determine the year of Yeshua's birth. One is based on the accounts of Yeshua's birth in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, with reference to the reign of King Herod, and therefore the timing of King Herod's death. Now, we know for certain that Messiah Yeshua was born while King Herod the Great was still alive. We know that because in Matthew 2, verse 1, that we're going to be looking at in a coming session, that the Magi came looking for the birth of this king of Israel, and Herod was the king at that time, so he was alive in Jerusalem. Now, Yeshua was up to 2 years old. I'm not saying he was 2 years old. He could have been 1 year old, could have been even less than that. But he was no more than 2 years old when Herod the Great ordered the massacre of all the male babies 2 years old and younger in Bethlehem. So that we know based on him talking to the Magi, when did you see the star that you followed here? It was no more than 2 years earlier. And so he figured, okay, so this child, this king that's been born, he's no more than two. Let me share another screen with you here. Okay, now I want to keep this screen up and I want to go through the details. And the reason I'm keeping the screen up is because I'm covering so much detail. I want you to see the picture of it so you can see the different theories, how they all match up with one another on that. Okay, so let me just say that up until the 20th century, so that's up until the 20th century. So that was up through the 1900s or maybe early 1900s. It was generally believed that King Herod died in 1 BC. Now, let me just say this BC and AD, basically, when they came up with that designation of the years, they believed that Yeshua was born in 1 AD. They didn't believe he was born in 0 year. And they believed it was 1 AD. And then the one right before that was 1 BC. So that was the year before Messiah, before Christ. Okay, so again, up through for sure the 1800s, maybe to the very early 1900s, it was generally believed King Herod died in 1 BC. The Jewish historian Josephus records that Herod died shortly after a lunar eclipse and sometime before Pesach or Passover. He also records that there was a Jewish holiday celebrating Herod's death. You can tell how popular he was. They actually came up with a holiday celebrating this tyrant is dead, and that was on Shavat 2. Now in 1 BC, which would be January 24th on our Gregorian calendar, it just so happens on that date of 1 BC that was 15 days after a lunar eclipse in 1 BC. So 1 BC is possible for his death if his two heirs that followed him, if they backdated the start of their reigns to 4 BC when it really was 1 BC. In other words, we have some historical records where Archelaus and Philip, who had two parts of his realm that they were ruling over, they somehow wrote, and from what people can determine, that were referring to 4 BC, but it's possible they backdated it from 1 BC to 4 BC because they wanted to try to give some more legitimacy to their reign, that they were maybe reigning along with their father in some way. So it's possible that they intentionally changed the date, and it really was 1 BC, and that's really when King Herod died. So for a long time, they believed he died in 1 BC. Now, since that time, and again, that was since the late 1800s, very early 1900s, generally scholars have said, no, we believe Herod died in 4 BC, based on what his two heirs said. Oh, we started our realm in 4 BC. So let me just say, it's safe to say that Herod died in either 4 BC or 1 BC. Now, that's important in terms of trying to determine when Yeshua was born. So Yeshua was born before either 4 BC or 1 BC. And he was born up to 2 years before Herod's death. Well, I say 2 years, it could have been 3 years. I'm sorry, it could be up to 3 years before his death at either of those times. And I'll explain about that in a moment. Now, according to Luke 2, verses 1 through 2, Messiah Yeshua was born after this census decree related to the days of Quirinius. that Luke refers to, which I mentioned, was either during 1110 BC to 87 BC, or it was during 4 to 2 BC. For certain, it was before 86. So I've got these up on the screen so that you can see those while I'm talking about them. Now, Dr. Fruchtenbaum points out, according to Josephus, Herod left Jerusalem for Jericho. So this is after the Magi would have come to Herod. Herod left Jerusalem for Jericho, which is where he spent the last year of his life. He died in Jericho, never again to return to Jerusalem. Okay, so keep in mind then, so that means the Magi would have shown up with Herod maybe about a year before he died. So if he died in 1 BC, that means they showed up in 2 BC. If he died in 4 BC, that means they showed up in 5 BC. And then Dr. Fruchtenbaum shares with us that again we know based on what the Herod killing all those precious children in Bethlehem, 2 years old and younger, that means Yeshua was born within a 2-year period before the Magi showed up. Okay, so let me go back and say that again. So if Herod died in 1 BC, that means he was in Jerusalem a year earlier, 2 BC. And so from 2 to 4 BC, Yeshua was born in that period of time. If Herod died in 1 BC, Yeshua was born between 2 and 4 BC. If Herod died in 4 BC, then Yeshua was born from 5 to 6 BC. Yeah, 5 to 7 BC, excuse me. 5 to 7 BC. Now, again, we say the wise men arrived. Maybe they were there a little bit more than a year before Herod died. So that's why there's a little bit of variance on that. Okay, so putting all these clues together, people theorize when Yeshua was born. Dr. Fruchtenbaum believes Yeshua was born sometime between the years of 6 and 7 BC. Others believe, I've read, like Wikipedia, believes Yeshua was born between 4 and 6 BC. Still others believe Yeshua was born 2 to 4 BC. I think it's safe to say he was in probably one of those 3 ranges. The second way that some people try to use to determine when Yeshua was born is based on subtracting his stated age. That was from Luke 3, verse 23, that he was about 30 years of age, which is intended to be approximate from the time of the start of his public ministry. At the time he started his public ministry, say he was about 30 years old. And that was in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. So again, he came after Caesar Augustus. That's in Luke 3, verses 1 through 2. So again, that leads to a birth of 2 BC or earlier, depending upon exactly what was it 30 years exactly? Was it about 30? So again, it seems certain to say, well, let me just say, I think we can certainly say Yeshua was born sometime between 2 and 7 BC. All right, so I think it's safe to say. And if you believe Herod died in 4 BC, as Dr. Fruchtenbaum believes, then Yeshua was born somewhere 5 to 7 BC. If Herod died in 1 BC, then Yeshua was born 2 to 4 BC. I don't feel strongly on either one of them, but you're entitled to, choose which one you think. And also the website Never Thirsty, I mentioned this in the previous session. You can just get it on the internet. It gives some good evidence for 2 to 3 BC. And this would fit Yeshua being around 30 years of age when he started his public ministry. Now, I'm going to talk about the theory about the day or the time of the year of Yeshua's birth not in this section, but in the next paragraph. And the reason I'm going to do that is that's when Dr. Fruchtenbaum does it in his book. Okay, so please, you can study that on your own, and I'll discuss that when I get in my next session. All right, let me stop sharing the screen. All right, now let me talk about the place of Messiah Yeshua's birth. Now, again, we know it's Bethlehem, but I'm talking about like where in Bethlehem. All right, so let me share one more screen. I just want to read verse 7 for you. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm getting the wrong one there. Let me go here. Okay, so this last verse, that's what I want us to look at. In Luke 2, verse 7. And it says, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, this time about Yeshua, and she wrapped him in cloths and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. All right, so let me stop sharing the screen there. So it's clear that Yeshua was Miriam's firstborn son. So he had the rights of the firstborn son. Also, this prepares us for Luke 2, verses 23 through 24, where it mentions about Miriam and Joseph offering up a sacrifice for the firstborn son. So that was, of course, because Yeshua was the firstborn son. Now, let me just say that when it says firstborn son, that also could imply, well, there was more children. Okay, so he was the firstborn. Now, that it doesn't absolutely say that that's the case, but it could imply that. We actually are going to see evidence later that I think is even stronger for the fact that that Miriam had other children later after Yeshua, and of course that was with Joseph being the father. But like I said, some think it implies that there were other children, and like I say, I believe there were other children, even though I know there's some like the Roman Catholic Church, they'll say no, she was a perpetual virgin. Now, let me just say, we know that Yeshua was born in Bethlehem, but where? Now, Dr. Fruchtenbaum points out that at that time, Bethlehem was a small village of maybe only a few hundred residents, and that Joseph and Miriam were unable to find accommodations in the public inn. He says today those would be called khans, Khans. And then he quotes Edersheim. He says Edersheim describes these public inns as large square buildings with a court in the middle, being intended for the beasts of burden or carriages, while rooms opened upon galleries all around. The rooms were unfurnished and were available to wayfarers for free. All right, I'm stopping the quote there. So Dr. Fruchtenbaum is saying because of the census, this public inn was full, so they turned Joseph and Miriam away. They had to go somewhere else, and they ended up going into a stable cave. In other words, a cave where there were some animals, and that's where they stayed. Maybe this cave was associated with this public inn, or maybe it was separate. Maybe somebody else, an individual, said, "Oh, well, you can go in my stable and give birth." And that's where Yeshua was born. Justin Martyr wrote in the first half of the 2nd century, so that means it was the 100s, that the birthplace was a cave. So going all the way back that far, we believe that Yeshua was born in a cave. So what I've shared there, that is Dr. Fruchtenbaum. That's what he teaches in his book. And let me just say that's a common viewpoint. I mean, if you see a story about the nativity of Yeshua's birth, usually it's something like that. Joseph's going up to a door. No, there's no room for us in the inn. You'll have to go somewhere else. That kind of thing. Now, let me just share with you. There's a challenge with, if I can say, that traditional view of the inn. It says there in the passage in verse 7, There was no room for them in the, and the Greek word there is kataluma. Now, kataluma, if you look in a Greek lexicon, which is just a Greek dictionary, it says guest room or dining area, not a public inn. This Greek word is used in a couple other places, at least a couple other places. It's used in Mark 14, verse 14. It's used in Luke 22, verse 11. At least one of those, if not both of those, is talking about the upper room where the Lord said, go to a taluma and prepare for me to celebrate the Passover. All right, we know that wasn't a public inn that he went to. This was in somebody's private residence, what we call the upper room. Now, in Luke 10, verse 34, this is the story of the Good Samaritan. If you remember the story, when you read it in English, it says that the Good Samaritan took this man that had been beaten on the road that went from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he took him to an inn and gave them money and said, take care of him until I come back. Now there, it's a totally different Greek word. It's not kataluma, like in our passage. There, it's pondaxeon, pondaxeon, and that is the actual Greek word for a commercial inn for travelers. So the point I'm trying to tell you is here in Luke 2, verse 7, it's not using the normal Greek word for a public inn or motel or, hotel or whatever you want to use there. Luke is using the word that means a guest room or dining area. This is like a private type of thing in someone's home. So you may say, well, Michael, why do so many of our English translations put in there, in? Why are they putting that there? Because it's giving a different impression for what this Greek word means. Well, the reason for it is that William Tyndale, who came up with the very first English translation of the New Testament, up until that point it was Greek and Latin. He was the first one that came up with it in English. And when he translated into English, he used a word that look like in, but I'm not sure if he really understood what this Greek word meant. And so ever since he used that, they basically use the same word. They may have changed it to in there in the King James translation, and almost all the English translations have continued that ever since, even though, to be honest with you, I don't believe it's a very accurate translation of the Greek word. Again, there's a different Greek word for a commercial, inn for people to stay in. So let me just say this: contrary to the common image that most people have of this scene, and there's others, I'm not the only one that believes this, do not believe that it's talking about Joseph showing up, knocking on the door of something like the Bethlehem Motel 6 and being turned away there because they didn't have any room available in this public inn there. But instead, it's talking about how they were staying in. He was looking. He was turned away. Because it was not a suitable room for them in a guest room or an area for Miriam to give birth. Now, see, here's the thing you need to understand: Joseph and maybe Miriam as well could have been originally from Bethlehem, even though they were living in Nazareth when our story starts here in Luke chapter 2. But at least this was Joseph's ancestral home, if he wasn't originally from there. So that means he probably had relatives. He probably had people he knew. Maybe they were distant relatives that lived in Bethlehem. And so it's most logical that when they went to Bethlehem for the census, they went to stay with somebody they knew. So they were in somebody's guest room there. And then they found that the guest room was not going to work out for them to give birth to the child. Also, contrary to the normal picture or image that people have of this story, I believe the scripture is indicating they didn't just show up on Messiah's Eve and we're in a hurry trying to find a place for Miriam to stay because she's just like ready to give birth any minute. But it appears that they had been in Bethlehem for some days before the birth. Now, let me show you something. I had not realized this even myself until I was studying this. Let me share the screen with you and show you this that maybe you haven't noticed it either. Look at Luke 2 and look at verses 3 through 6 again. All right, verses 3 through 4 talks about they were going from Nazareth, they were going down to Bethlehem. Verse 5, why were they going there? In order to register along with Miriam, who was engaged to Joseph and was with child. And notice verse 6. Notice how verse 6 starts. While they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth. Notice what it didn't say. It didn't say when they arrived. It says while they were there. Now, I will acknowledge it doesn't say how long that they were there. Maybe they weren't there that long. Okay. Maybe they'd only been there a few minutes. But I think the implication of it is they had been there maybe longer than most people think. They may have been there for several days. Joseph could have actually gone ahead and he's already done the census during that time. They are staying in somebody's guest room, somebody they know, and then while they're there, the days were completed for her to give birth. And then they have to move from where they were because where they were staying was not going to work out. And so that I believe is kind of a little different perspective. I can't say look 100% dogmatically on that, but I think that is just as valid as what we normally think that, oh, well, they were in a hurry, she's ready to give birth, and they want to do it right that moment. Now, again, the guest room that they were staying in or the guest area was probably full because there was a lot of people visiting there for the census. If it was one of the Jewish holidays like Sukkot, I mentioned, it's possible, about that. If that was the case, then they were also full there because of the holidays and stuff. So this guest room probably wasn't like a private guest room like we think about. All right, here's a bedroom. It's got, two people. They're the only ones in there. They can close the door. They've got privacy. That's not the kind of guest area we're talking about. We're talking about a more public guest area in someone's home where they may have had many friends and many relatives staying in that room. So since there were many people there, and now all of a sudden Miriam's ready to give birth, she needs some privacy. So they need to move and get away from all these other people and get someplace by themselves. Let me share a picture here. Now, hopefully I can get this and share this with you properly. Let me see if this is going to work here. Yes. Okay, so look at this picture. I'm sorry I don't have it in the middle of the screen there. But this is a layout of a typical home back at this time, such as what might have been a case there in Bethlehem. Okay, so the homes back then were built many times into the sides of hills, and they typically had an area for the animals at night in the front. So you can see, like, here's the door and there's the animal room. Okay. And so there would be a manger, which is again a feeding trough. I'm going to show you a picture of that in a moment. But again, this is in the entrance area. Why do they have this animal thing inside? Because at night they don't want somebody coming and stealing their animals. The family would go just up a few steps from this animal area and they would go into a family room. So this is all open. There's no wall or anything separating them. I mean, if you can imagine that, you see all these animals there and they can see you and the family room, but that's just the way they did it back in those days. And so they're sleeping up here in the family room, and they also apparently had a manger or a feeding trough up there as well for some of the animals. Now, sometimes I understand where the family room was, there might be attached to that, or maybe in place of that, a guest room. So the guests may be staying there, and again at night they would be seeing the animals, and they're all there up in the front. So one theory is that Yeshua could have been born in the front area of the house where the animals were. Now, in that case, that means the family, whoever's home it was, they would have been able to watch and see everything that was going on there. All right, so that's a possibility. You also see on this diagram a guest room in the back. Now, that's another possible way to view it, is that the guest room that they were staying in could have either been in the front or it could have been in the back. Okay, so let me stop sharing that screen. Now, let me just say that another possibility is that the houses in Bethlehem and its vicinity, some say they had caves as the back of the house where they would keep a prized ox or beast of burden, lest it be stolen. So if the guest room could have been in the front of the house and the animal shelter in the back. So it could be the animal shelter could have been in the front or it could have been in the back. So again, when Miriam was ready to give birth, she either went to the front of the house where the animals were, or she might have gone to a cave that was at the back of the house where she was staying. Now, that's provided that there was somehow access to this cave in the back. And the reason I say that is because in the next section, we're going to talk about the shepherds going there and seeing baby Yeshua there in this cave. So they obviously had to have access to that area. All right, let me show another picture here. Uh, this one's of the manger. So let me, in case you haven't seen one of those before, this is actually a manger or a feeding trough that was in Megiddo. So this is not from Bethlehem, but the Bethlehem one would have been very similar to it. And again, it it's probably the closest thing they had to a crib back in those days. So they obviously would have put some straw and stuff inside of it there to cushion it, and then baby Yeshua would be on the top of that in this stone crib, okay, or feeding trough that they had. You know, sometimes people talk about a manger scene as if that's where all the animals are, and you see maybe some posts, and there's a roof and all this kind of stuff. Well, that's not at all what it looked like. I mean, again, we're talking about it was in a cave, and again, the manger is not that whole scene, it's the feeding trough. Okay, so let me stop sharing that screen, and let me bring up uh, another picture. All right, so we've talked here about, so where was Yeshua born? As best we know, this cave, where would that be today? That would have been in the church, what's called the Church of the Nativity. Okay, traditionally, the Church of the Nativity is built over the spot where Yeshua was born. Some say that the traditional identification of this site for Yeshua's birth goes back to the middle of the 1st century. Now, in the 2nd century, this is maybe like 100 years after Yeshua's birth. In the 2nd century, the Roman Emperor Hadrian destroyed the town of Bethlehem. And after he destroyed the town, Hadrian built a temple to a pagan god, Adonis, I believe, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and planted a grove of trees over the site where believers in Yeshua had come to honor the place where Yeshua was born. Stephen Fan of the University of the Holy Land, he says, around what was left of the house which was only a cave, okay, where Yeshua was born. It said people remembered this. People within 15 years were already going back to that site to visit it. So 100 years after Yeshua was born, Justin Martyr went to Bethlehem and he asked, where was Yeshua born? And he was shown the cave and the spot where the Church of the Nativity is today. 100 years after that, Origen went to Bethlehem and he asked, where was Yeshua born? And he was taken to the very same cave and to that spot. 100 years after that, Emperor Constantine's mother, Helena, came to the Holy Land and she asked, where was Yeshua born? And the locals took her to the same spot. So in 326 AD, she built the Church of the Nativity. The original structure of the Church of the Nativity was destroyed in a fire in the early 6th century. And then the current structure that you see in this picture, was built later that century, okay, in the late 6th century. Now, when you go up to the entrance, you can just see that the small little entrance there down at the end of the open space. You have to bow down. You have to kind of bow down forward some to get inside of it. And it's called the door of the humility, because they wanted everybody to be humble or in a humble position as they go in there. I understand that also the Ottoman Turks didn't want people riding their horses in there. So anyway, it's still there today, dating back, like I say, hundreds and hundreds of years. Well, over 1,000 years back, maybe, like 1,300 years earlier. Now, let me show you in the next picture. Hopefully I can get this picture without any problems like I had a moment ago. All right, good. All right, I think I can bring this one up. Okay, so this, if you go into the Church of the Nativity, you go all the way to the back of the church. There's, I believe there's 2 stairwells. In this picture, you can see one of them. And you see a lady standing there and she's praying. And if you look behind her, you see the stairwell where it goes up. So that tells us that this grotto area that we're talking about, this is lower than ground level. And so they believe that this is the floor of that cave that Yeshua was born in. And if you look in front of this lady, she's looking down. There's something on the floor there. There's a star, a silver star on the floor. And that traditionally represents the spot down there where Yeshua was born. Now, again, how do they know what was the exact spot there? I don't know. So I don't know that we can say it was that exact spot, but I think it's pretty safe to say it was in that grotto area there. In fact, that grotto area, that lower area there, that is the oldest Christian place of worship in continuous use. Because this is going all the way back to the 4th century, the 300s, that this has been the site, they believe, when Yeshua was born, where he was born, and they've gone to worship the Lord at that spot. Jerome wrote, he's the one who came up again with the Latin translation of the New Testament. He wrote in 396 AD, even among those who are strangers to the faith, it is known that inside that grotto, he, that is Yeshua, who is adored and glorified by believers, was born. Okay, so let me stop sharing that screen. Okay, so we are going to stop there, and that actually completes paragraph 10. And so in the next session, we're going to look, I don't know if we'll complete it in one session or not, because I haven't done it yet, but in section 11, next time, we're going to look at Luke 2, verses 8 through 10, and that's the announcement to the shepherds. And in that section, we're going to talk about the possible date or time of the year of Yeshua's birth. And we're also going to talk about the significance of the swaddling clothes that it says that it said there in Luke 2, verse 7. It said he was wrapped in swaddling clothes. So I hope you will join us for the next session. And also, if you like this session, please indicate that on the YouTube channel, and please share it with others and encourage others to join in and watch this series. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and God bless you to next time. Shalom.